All right, let's get started. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on what coast you're on. Thanks for joining us today for our first webinar of the Risky Business series, where we're going to be talking about how cybersecurity compliance will affect your business in 2022. So we know a lot of organizations don't necessarily have to adhere to a compliance standard, but we're seeing more and more now that specific cyber insurance companies and third-party vendors are requiring that organizations that they're working with actually abide by some level of standard or prove that their risk is low when it comes to a cybersecurity perspective. So today we have Tom Allen with us here. Tom Allen is actually our resident information security officer at Foresite and also our principal consultant for cybersecurity compliance solutions. Tom comes with about 20 years of experience and an amazing list of certifications and training around cybersecurity and compliance, including certification for information systems auditor, and certified forensics analyst. Tom has CISSP, CCSP. He's probably one of the most well-certified and trained people that I know for sure. So I'm going to turn it over to Tom now, and he's going to walk us through what we can expect in the near future here in 2022 from a compliance and risk perspective. And then once we're done with the presentation, we'll open it up for some Q&A with Tom so everyone can get their own questions in. Tom, over to you.
Thanks, Marcella. Yes, so as Marcella pointed out, we're going to talk about cybersecurity compliance. So, if you record this, you could probably use it as a sleep aid if you're having trouble sleeping, because we all know how exciting compliance and cybersecurity is. But there actually is quite a bit going on new between 2021 and 2022 in risk and compliance. So that's what we're going to start with, talking about that. Then we're going to talk about why you might want to align to a framework. If you do want to, which one do you choose? How do you then measure if you're actually living up to the framework? And then how do you monitor your compliance once you feel like you're now measuring up to that framework? So in 2021, we had it was kind of the year of ransomware. I guess it started earlier than that, but it really took off in 2021. Because of that, there's many issues that came up from the standpoint of government looking at it, from the standpoint of insurers who got completely soaked in claims because of it, and then even business-to-business situations, or even business-to-consumer situations where the consumer or the other business now is concerned about your cybersecurity. So ransomware isn't the only reason, but that was really a big driver behind it. So because of that, as we talked about, government's now getting involved. In fact, government, when we think about that, we might think, well, they're going to enact laws that are going to make us do stricter things, possibly. But one area that we wanted to point out is 3 states, Connecticut, Ohio, and Utah, actually instituted something called Cybersecurity Safe Harbor. And what that is, it varies from the 3 states. They're not exactly alike. But basically, the idea is that if you can prove that you did some sort of reasonable cybersecurity, such as aligning to a standard or a framework, you are then indemnified from some potential fines. You also, these are incentive laden, so you have some incentives to align to these things, and so forth. So it's not all just difficult mandates without something positive to try and help out businesses as well. All in all, in 2021, 45 states and Puerto Rico introduced or considered more than 250 bills or resolutions that deal significantly with cybersecurity. And that's not counting the federal government, which also had their own, at least conversations about it. We know there was an executive order as well. So some of these require government agencies to implement cybersecurity. Some of them are breach notification things. Some of them are regulations around the insurance industry. And at least 35 of those states actually enacted bills in 2021. Notably, Indiana and North Carolina passed legislation that targets ransomware. Many of the states also enacted notification rules. So in other words, if you get ransomware, a lot of people were not notifying if they didn't fall under some specific regulation, but now many of these states, they want to be notified if you are impacted by ransomware. So if a supplier or an insurer or a partner, business partner, a business to business, a government says, prove to us that you're at least doing a minimum basic standard for your cybersecurity. Well, how do you do that? Well, that's why we align to a framework. So a framework serves as a system of standards and guidelines for best practices. And also the huge advantage of a framework is it's probable that if you follow one, you're not going to have blind spots that you missed or just didn't even think about, because it's going to be a holistic way of approaching cybersecurity. A framework should create a flexible, repeatable, and cost-effective approach to promote the protection and resilience of your business. And again, it basically, we're not going to say that if you align to a framework, you are completely protected or you're secure. It's going to help you not put yourself out there as a low-hanging fruit. I always liken a good framework or standard to, if anyone remembers in the old days, the car security thing called the club. So it basically was something that attached to your steering wheel, and then you locked it, and so the steering wheel couldn't roll. A good thief could defeat that in like 5 minutes. However, if you lived in a city like I did in Brooklyn, having that there, a lot of the potential car thieves are going to look at it and go, too much trouble, I'll move on to one that isn't. You don't want to be the one that isn't. You don't want to be that low-hanging fruit where you've got RDP open to the world and you are just a target for these people because you're easy. In fact, this quote from Clifford Stoll is great, and I think it's accurate too in my experience in the industry. The hacker didn't succeed through sophistication. Rather, he poked at obvious places, trying to enter through unlocked doors. Persistence, not wizardry, let him through. So often, back when I was doing pen testing, it wasn't some brilliant exploit that I crafted in a lab. It was because RDP was open to the internet. It was because no one had patched a server. It was some of these basic things. And then usually it's not just one thing. So if you're doing that one thing poorly, you're probably doing other things poorly. So one thing leads to another, and then you elevate to another and another. That's really the whole purpose of a framework, is to say, let's take that low-hanging fruit off, and then obviously, if you are a target of like a APT group or a sophisticated government group, they might still be able to break through you, but you're not going to get hit with these collateral damage, large sweeping net attacks that are going across the internet. You're going to be protected from those. So we talked about frameworks and standards. I just wanted to throw this in here. What is the difference between a standard and a framework? So a standard is prescriptive and a framework is generic, basically, is the best way to explain it. So a standard might say you have to have a password and it has to have 8 characters and capital and lowercase and number. That's a standard. A framework might say you have to have good password policies. So again, we're talking generic versus, in the case of what we're talking about here, where a insurer or a third party wants to know your status, either is probably going to work, either a framework or a standard. So for the purpose of this conversation, we're going to kind of talk about them as the same thing, but I just don't want to have people go semantics down the road of, well, this was a standard, and then you talked about a framework. We're just talking about a series of best practices that can be measured to show that you're in alignment with best practices. So which framework should I choose? So there's a lot of different possibilities here. So let's just cover a few of the best known frameworks or standards. And obviously we have here the government steps in. So the NIST cybersecurity framework is a great place to start, and I am a huge proponent of it. So you'll hear me talk about it if you're ever on a call with me quite a bit. So basically that came out of an executive order from President Obama to protect the nation's critical infrastructure. Now you might be saying, well, our business isn't part of the infrastructure. Well, the nice thing about it was that it took a holistic approach and said anybody, even if you're not critical infrastructure, can use this, and you will have a basic framework of how you can secure your organization. The framework starts with a function called identify. It has 5 functions. So we have identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. So if you think about those 5, it's a logical sort of circle. We can't protect what we don't identify. Once we protect it, can we detect if those protections break down? Once we make the detection, how do we respond? Then how do we recover? So we've got sort of a circle of cybersecurity there. So it's a really good place to start. It's also simple or complex, and that sounds kind of funny to say, but it's 108 subcategories, so it's fairly simple compared to many of these other standards that have many more controls to answer to. However, it could be kind of complex because you can take those categories, notice they're not controls, and you can plug in whatever controls you want that cover that category. So as we go down the list here, we have Center for Internet Security. So it used to be called the CIS Top 20. Version 8 now only has 18 controls, main base controls. So instead of calling it the Top 20, they're just calling it the CIS controls. But these focus very much on the protect, detect, and respond sections of what CSF would cover. So they don't really care that much, if at all, about policy, procedure, and governance, which you're going to find a lot of that in the identify sections of NIST CSF. So they're really just saying, do these things to stop the bad guys from hurting your network, stealing your data, and so forth. And if you have a piece of paper that tells you to do them, great. If you don't, as long as you're doing them. By contrast, the one below it, ISO, which is the International Standards Organization, as you might assume from that, standard means it's a standard, not a framework. However, it is very concerned with your management system, your information security management system. And that's ISO 27001, by the way. ISO has many standards across many things. In fact, a lot of people think of ISO, they think of quality assurance from ISO 9001 for manufacturing and so forth. So ISO, on the other hand, is very focused on the management of your information security, and therefore it gets very deep into policy, procedure, and governance as opposed to the CIS Top 20. So something I like to tell people all the time is if you really want a detailed, deep, and thorough framework standard to go by, you should take NIST Cybersecurity Framework, make it your framework, and use the CIS top controls for your protect, detect, respond, and use ISO for your identify. So you're getting the best of both worlds, and then therefore you'll have a very mature framework. ISO is often, as the title says, international. It's often viewed positively for companies that have international presence. It is accepted by many countries, but also, as we mentioned, because of its background in quality, a lot of manufacturers love ISO because they already have an ISO framework that they're using for quality, so extending it to security, not as daunting a task. So that might be a reason to choose ISO. Finally, let's talk about SOC 2. So SOC is Service Organization Controls. It's managed by the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. SOC 1, or SOC at first, was really a financial controls framework that was used to check a company's security against fraud and things like that. As these things became more and more digitized, they extended it to cybersecurity. And then they came up with a whole standard called SOC 2. So if you hear SOC 1, financial controls, SOC 2, cybersecurity. And what SOC 2 does is it uses a set of controls called the trust services criteria. And I mean, you could take any control set and use sort of the SOC framework on it, but that's the mainly used one. And it breaks down the controls into 5 principles, which are confidentiality, well, security, of course, confidentiality, integrity, privacy, and availability. So it's used often, and you're seeing it more and more. So a lot of companies are using it as their standard to go by. But it's often, it was seen initially in data centers and things like that. But basically, you're using those set of controls. You are coming up with your sort of control objectives and your control statements, how we do these controls. And then the auditor is then writing a report with an opinion on whether your controls, as stated, are actually implemented in a way that they take care of those controls. So what you get out of it, with ISO, you get a certification. With SOC 2, you get a report. So a SOC 2 Type 2 report is going to be a detailed report about your system, your controls, and the opinion of the auditor as to whether your controls meet the objectives of those controls. So where you might want to go with SOC 2 over some of these others is generally if you're being asked to, for one thing. But if you're a financial corporation, if your business supports the finances of other businesses, that's another good reason to do it, things like that. So, but there are many frameworks, there are many standards. So some of the things that are going to dictate which one you decide, we already discussed. If you're international, you may want to go with ISO. If you're a government agency, but sometimes they are data specific too. So, for example, if you are part of the defense industrial base and you do work for the Department of Defense under the federal acquisition regulations, you may want to do NIST 800-171. Now, yes, that is specific to the data, the controlled unclassified information, but there's nothing to say you can't extend that to your entire organization and say we're going to protect all our data this way and use that as a standard to cover your entire entity. There's PCI, which is credit card data. There's healthcare, EPHI. So all of those things need to be considered when you're trying to decide what we're going to use to prove to everyone that we are doing this in an adequate way. The other thing you might want to consider is your organization's maturity. So if you've never done a framework alignment before and you feel like you're going to have a lot of gaps and a long way to go, you may not want to bite off a SOC 2 or an ISO right away. You may want to use CSF to get yourself mature and up to speed so that then you can easily jump from that into an ISO certification or a SOC 2. So how would we conduct a framework assessment? So for starters, we want a metric. So in most of these controls, some of them, this is not true, so don't hold me to this, but most of them are not binary, yes, no, on, off. Most of them are, do we do it all the time? How mature are we at doing this control? And so generally, CMMI has a good option, but there are maturity scales, numerous of them, or you can make up your own. Generally, we're looking at something that's going to be like a 0 to 5, with 0 being, we don't do this at all. 1 might be, we try to do it. Sometimes we do it, sometimes we don't. 2 might be, we tell our people who are deploying our systems and managing our systems to do this verbally. 3 might be, well, we have a policy, procedure, and process written that says we do this. 4 might be, we have that policy, procedure, and process, and we audit to make sure we're doing this. And then 5 might be something like, we're so good at doing this, we have a unique way that everyone else in the world should follow because we're the best. So with that scale in mind. You take the controls and you say, okay, for this control, do we have a password policy if the control is passwords? If so, is it written? If so, do we audit it and make sure it's being adhered to on all systems? So that might define your maturity on that particular control. Now, what you want to do is you want to first create what you call a target profile for yourself. So basically, you want to look at all the controls and say, how mature do we want to be? Because you don't want to be a 5 on every control. If you are, you're probably spending way too much time, effort, and money to do it for all the controls. That doesn't mean there isn't a control or a handful of controls you don't want to be a 5 with. There may be. But this way you go through each control and you say, what does the business want to be? So if you're a shop that develops software, you may want higher level, higher maturity of controls around your software development process. But if you don't do software development, or you kind of just dabble in it, you may want lower maturity levels on that. You create this target profile. Then your second step is to measure, to go out there to the people who manage these processes and find out, what are we doing today? Do we live up to what we want to be? And wherever you don't, wherever there's a delta, you create a plan of action. And the most important thing about plan of actions is to create timelines and hold people accountable for them. So often in an assessment or an audit situation, you see that a POAM was done a year or two ago and no progress has been made on it. So basically they did the POAM, put it in a drawer in a file on a file server, and nobody did anything. So you want to have regular meetings. You want to make sure that people are being held accountable for their responsibilities to fix that delta. So then once you're happy with it, and you feel like, oh, I forgot about this, sorry, let me go back. So do you want to do a self-assessment, or do you want an outside vendor to come in and do an assessment? So there are advantages and disadvantages to both. The advantage to a self-assessment, the people doing your assessment are familiar with your people, process, and technologies. They can assess this pretty accurately, pretty quickly, and you can move faster, and it's obviously cheaper. Having an outsider come in, the advantage to that is if you get someone from the outside, often they have different types of experience than the people inside. So they're going to look at the controls and perhaps say, well, I see you wrote the control this way, but maybe you want to think about this, or maybe we should do it that way. So that's one advantage. The other advantage is if you're using this assessment to assure someone that you're doing things to a certain level, then a self-assessment is there's kind of an inherent conflict of interest in it. So we're doing great because we say we're doing great. That's basically what a self-assessment comes across as. Whereas an outsider assessment that has, someone's credentials behind it, who's putting their credibility on the line to say you're doing things you're supposed to do, may have more value and weight to a third party. So once we get where we're happy with where we are, how do we maintain it? So traditionally, assessments were point in time. You kind of did them annually or biannually or sometimes every 3 years. And you said, as of that point in time, we were happy with where we were with our maturity and our cyber practice. The problem with that is, say you did that on December 7th, 2021, and then December 9th, 2021, Log4j is revealed, and now the threat landscape's changed completely. Are we going to wait another year, 2 years, 3 years to measure that? How are we going to deal with the shifting landscape? Then on top of that, who's going to do it? Are we going to sit there with spreadsheets? Are we going to have tools? What are we going to do to make sure that we're maintaining that level of maturity across different threats, different vulnerabilities, different business changes, things like that, different technologies? So what a lot of people are doing now, we're going to what's called integrated risk management platforms. So what they're trying to do is basically have a sort of portal, a place you could go at any point in time that keeps a live, up-to-date score of where you are in your framework alignment. really it's about putting all these different data points together that we now have, such as vulnerability scans, such as threat feeds and threat intelligence, our patch status, our endpoint protection, our log management. All of these endpoints relate directly to how we're doing with our risk and compliance. So if we could get those things feeding into a tool that also understands the regulations, what our stakeholders want, what the different laws are, and normalize all of that to the point where we have a whole picture of a puzzle, not just little pieces sitting all over the place. That's the goal. And in the past, these types of platforms have been very enterprisey. They've been required sort of to have a full-time employee who's an expert at the platform to manage it, and only large enterprises were doing these sort of things. But today, with the cloud, with AI and ML out there, we're finding more and more platforms that are accessible to small and mid-sized businesses that can help them, again, just log into a portal and say, where do we stand today with our risk and our cybersecurity framework alignment? And that's really the goal of these things. So, the cyber threat is mainly a reflection of our weaknesses, or an accurate vision of digital and behavioral gaps is crucial for consistent cyber resilience. So said Stefan Napo, who's the global head of information for international banking industry. And that's so true. That's really what we want. We want to be able to see what's going on in all these different areas of our threats, our risks, our vulnerabilities, and that vision, that accurate vision, is really what's going to get us to the end goal of all of this, which is to prevent our data from being hacked or ransomed, or to basically secure and assure our customers, our stakeholders, that we are doing what we have to do and we are taking it seriously. And this is not just a ad hoc throw stuff at the wall to see what sticks. We are doing this in a methodical and refined, mature way. So what are the takeaways from this? So first of all, we have a need now to prove our cybersecurity posture to our stakeholders. This is best being done by aligning to a standard or a framework. Selecting the right standard or framework is crucial to our success. We need to accurately measure our current state and put plans in place to meet our targets, and then to continuously monitor the status over time. And with that in mind, Foresite also has an integrated risk management tool that you are welcome to set up a demo of or talk to someone about. But there are many of them, and this is not meant to be a sales pitch, but I just wanted to make sure you're informed that we do have our integrated risk management tool if you're interested. And that's it.
All right, thanks so much, Tom. So I know you had a lot of great content there. I want to invite anyone that wants to ask any questions now to go ahead and drop them in the Q&A box. I see that we did get a request for slides from the presentation, so we will have someone from our team reach out to anyone who requested the slides specifically and provide you guys with a copy of that. In addition, as Tom mentioned, this webinar was kind of perfectly timed. We are actually starting to provide demos of our new integrated risk management tool. So if you would like a demo, please feel free to go ahead and click on the request a demo box and set up some time to talk to our team. You can also get all of the resources and information regarding the integrated risk management tool, and anything else about our Foresite cybersecurity compliance consultancy that Tom heads up on the links under the Foresite box that's probably on, I believe, the right-hand upper corner of your screen. All right, I got a question for Tom. How often do you typically need to return to clients for ongoing cybersecurity posture evaluations?
So if that's all we're doing for them, usually it's annually. We do it once a year. If they are provision clients, then we can kind of continuously monitor it as we discussed already. And then we just do touch points throughout the year to kind of look at where they're at and what they could do to improve, or if we've got dips or gaps or things like that. But if it's just a come on site, well, nowadays we do it remote thanks to COVID, but just a kind of one look at a time, generally it's annually. I have some customers that we, again, kind of do a monthly call, but the most part it's annually.
And Tom, would you say that's the benefit of having an integrated risk management platform, is that you can kind of maintain and upkeep this risk management and compliance continuously without needing to hire a consultant, 5 or 6 times a year to kind of give you a sanity check?
Sure, yeah. Ultimately, the goal is to put people like me a little bit out of business, not completely out of business, but so that it can be managed within a business, and then only when there are questions and want a third party look at it because of to assure people. But in general, the goal is to be able to have someone at the business be able to go into a portal, look at something, and know right where they stand today, and they could go back and look last month, the month before that, and so forth.
All right. I don't think we have any more questions. We want to thank everybody for joining us. This video is recorded, so we will be providing a recording of this video as well. Feel free to request a demo, as I mentioned, or click on any of the links about Foresite to get more information about how we're working with cybersecurity compliance and risk management. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.